actually fits in the delivery of project and understand what the role of value is and what we need to be able to think about and understand and contemplate in terms of being able to not just measure it, but also be able to manage it effectively. We want to explore the challenges of assessing and managing value and be able to provide you with strategies to be able to appropriately manage value realization on your projects. In terms of the webinar process, things you need to know, this is an Adobe Connect presentation. It consists of the PowerPoint, it should be visible on your screen in front of you, as well as computer-based audio stream. The slides as well are available for download and can be downloaded from the Files box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any problems or require any help at all over the course of the webinar, please get in touch with Heather. She can be reached at heather@projectmanagement.com by email and is standing by and more than ready, willing, able, and happy to be of assistance. If you have questions today, and I certainly hope you do, we have a question and answer box on the side of the screen as well. You can use that to submit any questions you have about the content of the presentation, any clarifications, follow-ups, perspectives and additional thoughts from your end. And we will work through as many of those as we can as we get to the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Ideally, we'll have at least 10, if not 15 or so minutes to be able to work through those. Depending on the number of questions we receive, we may not be able to answer all of the questions, but I'll certainly do my utmost to answer as many of them as we can in our time available and still wrap up within 1 hour. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for future reference for download from the projectmanagement.com site. And as well, I will have information later on how to claim professional development units for those of you who are certified with the Project Management Institute. So in terms of our agenda today, once we're past our introduction, as always, we'll spend a little bit of time defining our terms, and then we're going to dive into the content. First off, understanding value and where it fits within the project lifecycle, explore what the challenges are of managing value, and provide strategies to be able to manage value more effectively going forward. We'll finish up, as I've mentioned, with a Q&A session where we'll work through as many questions as we're able to about the content of this particular webinar. So let's define our terms, and in this case we're actually going to explore a couple built around the idea of value. Now, value is one of those big fuzzy nebulous words. So if you actually look it up in the dictionary, as I've done, what you find is a number of different interpretations that can be used to ascribe and understand value. That it's a fair return or equivalent in goods, services, or money, the monetary worth of something, the market price, its relative worth, utility, or importance. It could be a numerical quantity that's assigned or is determined by calculation or measurement, the relative duration of a musical note, the relative lightness or darkness of a color, and something intrinsically valuable or desirable. All of which are useful in their own rights, but we actually step back and say, so what does that have anything to do with projects? There are a couple of particular interpretations that are especially meaningful and useful. One, when we think about value in the context of the benefits of a project, it's really about the fair return, whether that's in goods, services, money, or something else, for the investment associated with conducting the project. It's the return we're looking to get as a result of having made that investment. It's the relative worth, or it's the utility of doing that project. And ideally, it's numerical, i.e. measurable, in terms of the impacts that are incurred and the impacts that are received, having actually performed and delivered the project. It's the degree to which project results are intrinsically valuable or desirable. Now, the key thing to keep in mind in terms of value is that can range from tangible to intangible. Often there's a bit of a bias towards tangible, that which we can concretely measure and more specifically put a dollar value to, but that's not to discount the value, the role, or frankly the strategic importance of intangible benefits. Many projects that organizations, both in the public and in the private sector, choose to do have very little to do with financial return, have a lot more to do with more strategic but intangible value, whether that's enhancing reputation, improving visibility in the marketplace, being able to build a sense of goodwill, of stature within the community, all of which are important, all of which, if you extrapolate from that, because I have this and therefore I have this, and I have this stature and that gives me this reputation and that makes me visible to these customers, you may be able to loosely associate a dollar value to, but you're not going to be able to directly measure it, and there are going to be a number of assumptions, provisos, and quid pro quos to be able to actually establish what that value looks like. So it's not to say intangible value is not important or is less important or isn't equally important to tangible value, but it can be more difficult to manage, and that can have an issue in terms of how we think about managing and demonstrating value on our projects. Now, when we talk about value, what we often talk about as well is benefits realization. And there is more work has been done in order to formalize what benefits realization is, particularly actually in the European context and in the body of knowledge that's put out by the International Association of Project Management, where they talk about benefits realization as the management of how time and resources are invested into being able to make desirable changes. And that's a really nice turn of phrase, desirable changes, because what it does is it very consciously and specifically, if implicitly, embraces both tangible and intangible value. It's not about it's specifically looking at return or specifically looking at dollar benefits back, but it's looking at what are the changes that we actually desire, whatever the reason is underlying those desired changes. Now, when we think about benefits realization management, which is what the acronym BRM stands for, benefits realization management practices are focused on and are endeavoring to be able to ensure that there's alignment between project outcomes and business strategies. So the project delivers on the results. The business strategies specifically stipulate and set out as a desire or goal. And this has been shown in research to increase project success across different countries as well as different industries. So benefits realization management is used to manage the investment by organizations in procurement, in managing projects, in managing programs, and also managing portfolios. And it's also used to ensure that the organization maintains a benefits focus during continuous business operations. In other words, once we've delivered the results of the project, once the project team is disbanded and we've operationally assumed responsibility for the results, that there's still an emphasis and there's still an intent to ensure the realization of value. And that becomes an ongoing function and something that maintains the level of visibility, continues to be front and center and ranked in terms of importance, ensuring that that value actually is realized. Now, a key question in all of this is, so what does the PMBOK actually have to say about value and about benefits realization? And the interesting thing is, right now, it actually says comparatively little. If you were to look at the PMBOK and do a search or go to the index, it does define the context of business value. But what it actually articulates in that context is the entire value of the business, and particularly at that point biased towards more of a private sector view. It does talk about value realization, focusing on the overall results. But what it has to say there is only a couple of things. One, that it begins with comprehensive strategic planning and management, similar to the idea of benefits realization we're talking about from the IPMA definition. And what it also identifies that portfolios, programs, and projects bridge the gap between strategy and value realization. Projects deliver product, service, and results, and then in programs and portfolios, projects enable achievement of organizational strategy and objectives. Now, there's an interesting sense there that it's useful to highlight. The assumption there is projects do stuff, and the alignment and the attainment of organizational value is largely through program management and portfolio management strategies. And that is, frankly, a bit of a bias and a bit of a challenge in terms of how the standards are actually defined right now. Because the PMBOK, the Project Management Body of Knowledge, doesn't speak a lot to either the definition or the realization of value. There is some reference to business case, but as an overall process of identifying, of managing, and ultimately of harnessing and ensuring realization of value, today the standard is pretty silent. That is changing. So just a couple of days ago, actually, PMI issued a request for proposals for research to support introducing more an understanding of value realization and benefits realization into its standards. So there is research and work going on right now that is ultimately going to lead to, I believe, an expansion of that definition. But today, in the context of the standards we have now, there's not a lot that's specifically defined. And so what we have to do is to boldly step off from here and talk about what we know and what we do understand and value and what we can, on our own speed, develop as strategies to be able to effectively manage and ensure realization of value and benefits through the projects that we do manage. To do that, it's helpful to actually understand value as simply a concept. And to do that, it helps to be able to actually articulate the role of benefits definition and benefits realization in the context of the overall project lifecycle. So here we've got a generic view of the lifecycle that says within an overarching process of business planning and project governance, overall oversight of the project, we deliver projects that run from concept to completion. And again, this echoes the basic essential principle of a project. There's a defined start, there's a defined end, and there's some specific results that we want to get out of that project. And that's the overall process that project management, as it's defined, is designed to be able to support. It starts when the project begins, it completes when the project finishes. But we also, as project managers, recognize that for any project, there's work done before the project actually becomes a project. So there's opportunity assessment in terms of taking an idea and actually evaluating that, prioritizing that, and turning that into a potential opportunity for consideration within the business plan. And oftentimes that's where a project proposal or a project charter would actually get articulated, is much earlier in the life cycle to be able to actually support that overall identification and prioritization process. And there's also often a process of feasibility where we evaluate and weigh the merits of that idea. We identify the potential means by which that idea could be realized, the potential alternatives that are available to us. We evaluate those alternatives. We almost do a mini project plan for each of those to understand what would it cost and what would it look like to be able to manage that option that way, and also what would the corresponding benefits be. And when we're building a business case, that's the input that we're using to be able to establish what that business case looks like. Here are the alternatives that we're choosing from. Here is the relative cost, both for doing the project and for actually sustaining then the results of the project over whatever time period we're actually looking at. Here are the corresponding benefits that can be realized from each of those options, and then we do a cost-benefit analysis to be able to understand what the most financially attractive opportunity is. That's where we define the value that we're promising as a result of doing this project. So it's at the outset of the project where then once we've delivered the result, after the project, there's still work to be able to take and use the results in order to be able to make sure that we do get to the delivered benefits. And that really often, for most organizations, gets referred to by some phrasing leaning towards benefits realization. This is where we actually get the value that we wanted. And there's a couple of important ideas there around how we actually think about success, how we think about success of our projects, and also how we think about the success of the business cases we develop around our projects. Because when we think about project success, there are some key questions that we actually need to think about and answer. First off, we need to be able to explore what did the project actually produce? So what was the result we're doing the project to get? What was that thing that we did the project to be able to realize? What's the scope that we're delivering? What's the what that's framed within the objective? Here's what we're doing this particular project to receive. We also, because the project is time-bound, need to understand when did that project start, and also to be able to identify when did the project end. And a key principle of project success is being able to evaluate, did the project deliver on what it was supposed to do? So a couple of key principles. What the project produces defines the objective. It's what we're actually doing the project to get. Projects are bounded in time. So to evaluate project success, we've got to understand, did the project deliver on its objectives, and how successful was the project manager and the project team in delivering on those objectives? Did we get what we were supposed to get? Did we get that on time? Did we get that on budget? Did we deliver a result? Now that definition of project success should ultimately be able to be assessed as soon as the project is done. As soon as we actually receive that result, we should be able to assess and evaluate, did we get what we were supposed to get, and was it delivered on time, on budget, to specification? Did it do what it said it was going to? Nothing there has anything to do with value. It's got to do with the delivery result. And because of that, I've heard arguments to say this is the wrong definition of project success. I'd actually argue against this. This is the right definition of project success because the success of the project is doing what it was supposed to do. But there's an additional dimension of success that we also need to think about, and that's business success, where we need to recognize where the business decisions are made, both the choice to do the project in the first place and also the choice to then use the results of the project to deliver the value that was promised when we made the choice to move forward. And so when we think about evaluating business success, that actually requires answering two questions. First off, and this is an important one that often gets overlooked, were the choices in the business case a reasonable representation of the problem and of the opportunity, of the potential benefits that could be realized by actually solving that problem? And then secondly, did the organization actually use the results to realize the promised benefits? So what project success is about is, did the project do what it was supposed to do? Business success is about, and did the business case deliver on its intended promise? First off, was it a reasonable promise to make? And then did we actually manage using the results to deliver on that promise? Business success isn't fully in the control of the project team. In fact, a lot of it often is outside of the scope, the influence, the control, and even the purview of the project team to actually influence, in that they are there to produce the project results. But that's not to say that they don't need to understand what business success actually is, because they have a lot of opportunity in the context of the choices that they make in order to be able to actually influence success. So what I want to do is actually illustrate this by a bit of a case study. There was an organization, it is an example actually, it's a decision-making case I often use when I am teaching project management to a senior audience to be able to help illustrate the difference between these 2 points. Because there's a telecom organization that had undertaken a project in order to be able to ultimately improve its customer service, and in particular, reduce the billing errors that were produced in its billing system. One of the banes of telephone companies' existence is often their billing system, because they're very large and very complex. And because of that complexity, there's a very great reluctance to be able to wade in and try to fix anything, for fear that by fixing one thing, you wind up breaking 3 others. So what this organization has actually found over the course of time, benchmarking themselves against other comparable organizations, was that their customer service organization that existed solely to respond to billing-related defects was about 50 FTEs, which is about 5 times larger than their next competitor. So comparable organization had 10 FTEs looking after billing-related defects. They had 50. And so what they did was they initiated a project where the goal of that project was to reduce the billing-related defects associated with the billing system by 90%, so that 45 of the FTEs that were responsible for providing customer service around that function could be redeployed elsewhere in the organization. So key thing there, nobody was going to lose their job. These are actually some of the best customer service people within the organization, dealing with a very difficult job, because oftentimes calls with their customers would end with, well, thank you for calling, Mrs. Smith. Good talking to you. We'll looking forward to hearing from you again next month. Because the challenges would repeat over and over and over again, and customers, quite irately, would call in and complain about the inaccuracy in their bills. Their goal was to actually reduce those defects. So they initiated a project. It was about 18 months long. $2.3 million involved a fairly large team of people to be able to work on it. And what they did was set out to be able to figure out how to solve the problem. They did a lot of research. They did a lot of analysis. They first off went and tried to understand what are the sources and causes of errors, how many bills do each of those errors affect. They did a Pareto analysis to be able to prioritize those so that they could actually focus on those errors that were producing the largest number of defects, and then work down to a point where they got all of the low-hanging fruit dealt with, and then everything else would be issues that might only cause 1 or 2 customers a problem, but might actually be much, much more complex and expensive in order to be able to resolve. Project was delivered under budget. It was delivered on time. It actually delivered just slightly north of 90% defect reduction. And yet, at the time that the results of the project was delivered, the company in question, and again, most telecoms are union environment, was about to go into collective bargaining with its union, particularly to go into collective bargaining with a union that actually represented the customer service representatives in this department. And so, in order to be able to avoid the potential for grievance and issue around the redeployment of 45 people during the collective bargaining process, having completed the project, the organization chose not to redeploy the 45 people. And for the next 2 years, they continue to, as an organization, have 50 people now doing the work of 5. And so the question that I ask of people is, was this project a success or not? Now think about that for yourself. Was it successful or wasn't it successful? And half of you are probably saying absolutely it was successful because it delivered on what it was supposed to do, it was on time, it was on budget, that's all good. And then there are going to be another subset of you that are going to very clearly say, nope, that project didn't do what it was supposed to do, didn't actually save the money. And that's the problem that we need to talk about and think about in terms of articulating project success from business success. In the context of this organization, they viewed it as one of the most successful projects they had ever conducted. It was done well. It dealt with a very complex and risky number of changes into their billing system that were successfully delivered. They realized more than the defect removal efficiency they wanted. They did it on budget, and they did it on time. They did it actually early. And so from their view, the project was absolutely a success. The second issue is one of, was it a business success? And there, the business case didn't get realized. Those resources didn't get redeployed for almost 2 years. So you have the sunk costs of 45 FTEs, salaries, and associated benefits and administrative costs that were still being sunk into that operation, even though you had 50 people doing the work of 5. So the business case itself didn't actually get realized, didn't get delivered on. And even though they subsequently realized the benefits from redeploying those people later, they're never going to get back that lost 2 years. But from the perspective of the organization, that was okay because there was a separate and distinct business case around, is it worth it to us to be able to continue to maintain those people there in order to be able to maintain labor peace while they go through the collective bargaining process. And there was a separate and distinct decision around that that said, yes, we're actually going to hold off doing that. And that's worthwhile to do, even though in the context of the business case in the first project, it doesn't actually make a lot of sense. That leads to a number of challenges in terms of managing value. When we think about being able to manage value, there are many, many challenges that we have to deal with. The first of those, and actually one of the most common, is having clarity around what the actual expected benefits are. There's also issues and challenges around accountability for realizing those benefits, around the measurability of benefits, and also about the handoff between projects and operations. Apart from that, it goes pretty well. I jest. So when we think about clarity of expected benefits, what we're really talking about here is the degree to which the business case is realistic, which is one of the criteria I set out as a means of ensuring delivery business success. Was the business case reasonable in the promises it actually made? And there are some inherent challenges here that's important to be aware of. Two of those are, there is a tendency in business cases to understate the costs and also to overstate the benefits. And this is normal. It is systematic. It is, in fact, systemic. Research done into business cases in large transportation projects, for example, found 80% of business cases strategically misrepresented their costs and their benefits. Strategic misrepresentation being a nice term for lying. Because the emphasis there is on getting the project approved. So if we can lowball the costs and if we can upsell the benefits, then we're going to make the project look more attractive, and therefore there's a greater likelihood that it's going to go ahead. And the problem there is there's less focus on what's actually required to realize those promised benefits when the project is delivered. And so we have some key issues there that we need to be able to resolve. The believability of the business case, as well as the degree to which those expected results can actually be realized. In addition, there's a question of accountability for realizing benefits. Whose job is it anyway? And this is where we run into the problem that we talked about in terms of the case study that I just took you through. Was the project a success or not? And where it's so important to be able to delineate project success from business success. There is a lot of temptation for project managers to be able to want to take on overall ownership of, I'm going to make sure I deliver value. And there's a lot of push from organizations to make sure projects do deliver value, where there's a temptation to, again, saddle the responsibility and accountability on the project manager. And the question we have to ask is that actually reasonable? Projects deliver change. And by that, they're delivering whatever the expected product or service or result is as per the PMBOK definition of a project. But there's an operational question of then implementing the results of the change, actually using those results in order to be able to get the benefits that were promised. You can improve a process, but not implement it. You can enhance a system, but then not use it. You can deploy those results, but then not actually redeploy the people that you no longer require in order to be able to perform that process. And so are we making what are oftentimes the hard, difficult, painful business decisions necessary to be able to actually implement the change and realize the results? And what we've got to be able to do is identify who is responsible for that associated change. Is it functional management? Is it operational leadership? Is it executive responsible for the overall project? And we've got to be able to understand what's their involvement with both the formation and the delivery of the project. So what we're talking about here is key issues around ownership of ensuring the change occurs, and also clarification of ownership between the project and the operations. There was a project I audited only about 3 years ago, actually, and this is the thing. Keep in mind, this is 3 years old, where there was a new program being implemented by a provincial government department. The change to legislation had been announced by the minister, and that's when the department actually found that they had a project. They initiated a project, brought in their vendor to be able to plan out and make the systems changes necessary to be able to now deliver this new program. The vendor worked long and hard for several weeks and months to be able to deliver that. There was a lot of overtime, a lot of focus, a lot of emphasis on what does this look like and how do we do it and how do we deliver it. But ultimately they did that successfully, and they managed the system changes necessary to be able to now enable this department to be able to offer and deliver this new program that had been announced a few months earlier. And then the organization sent out an email saying the system's ready, you can deliver the new program now. No clarification of responsibilities, no identification of changes to job responsibilities and accountability, no identification of how to deliver the program, the underlying processes, or even how to use the system in a way that it was designed to be able to do. It was just systems changed, go use it. And so what's the likelihood that program actually delivered on the promise that was set for it when it was initiated to do? What you got is a project to be able to create organizational change that has an impact on people's lives being translated into, it's a systems project, go and change the code so that it can do what it's supposed to do, and then let everybody know, with the assumption that everybody is actually going to know what they're supposed to do. And so we still have organizations trying to implement change by email, which leads to some fundamental questions about where that accountability for the delivery and the responsibility for ensuring realization of benefits actually exists. We do also have questions around the measurability of benefits and the degree to which the benefits associated with our projects are actually quantifiable. To what extent can we actually put a number on them? And that depends, first off, on the degree to which we actually understand them, and also on the nature of the benefits that are being expected, whether they're tangible or whether they're intangible. It's much easier, by definition, to measure tangible benefits, particularly because we can attach a dollar value to them. There's actually a concrete financial impact, whether that is increasing service, whether that is increasing revenue, whether that is avoiding cost, associated with tangible benefits. Intangible benefits, because they are associated more with reputation, with impact, with perception, with warm fuzzy feelings, are a lot more difficult to measure, which doesn't make them unimportant, it just makes them hard to demonstrate. We've got to be able to understand what's the degree to which the benefits have actually been formally articulated? Has someone defined and thought through what this is actually going to do? And what's the actual measurability of the intended results? So our key issues here are, first off, our ability to actually demonstrate benefits realization, and then what the measurability of intangible benefits actually is. And we have a challenge that we need to address in terms of the handoff between projects and operations, which is often where attainment of value falls down. Because it's about clarifying the transition from projects to operations, to actual functional responsibility for using the project results. And that's a product of identifying who's responsible for change management, the definition of expectations that exist within the project for that, because the reality is there are often change management activities that are defined within the project needs to be able to deal with. But those aren't necessarily going to be all of the change management activities. There are also going to be ongoing responsibility that is a part of functional management. And there is going to be some transition that occurs, whether that's after a pilot period, whether that's after a warranty period, whether that's through an overall deployment process, that is going to see the involvement and focus of the project team wane, and is going to see the involvement of the functional management team ramp up, and a transfer of responsibility occurring between those two parties. And what we've got to understand is what our means of monitoring impact and monitoring resulting benefits actually is, the degree to which they're attributable to the project and the degree to which they actually result from the ongoing operational activities that continue to occur once the project's actually done. And so we've got to make sure is that we've actually got some effective handoff. We understand what that handoff and transition needs to be. And we also need to understand what value we expect to be attributable to the project, what value we expect to be attributable to ongoing operations, and how we manage and measure the realization of both of those. So while there are a lot of challenges, that's not to say there aren't ways to be able to do this, and there aren't ways to be able to do this effectively. First and foremost, though, we need to go back to where we started this presentation, which is being clear about success. Being clear about what the project does and how we know it is successful. Being clear about the business case and how we actually evaluate business success. And being comfortable with the fact that those are two separate ideas, solving two separate problems with two very different time-bound views of when they can actually be measured. Project success, the completion of the project, and business success whenever the business case says we should have actually realized those benefits. But when we think about how we actually strategically manage value, and particularly what we need to be aware of as project managers, what we need to do is first off go back to recognize where value is created. The project value is conceived in the business case. That's where we actually define and articulate it. So that's before the project is commenced. And it's a promise of what the project results are to deliver in terms of expected impacts once the project itself is actually done. What projects do is deliver change. So they implement whatever that product, service, or result actually is. And there's going to be some, but not all, change management and implementation activities associated with that. The only reason you would have all there is because the project team actually is also the team that assumes functional ownership of the results. And where that's true, responsibility can blur because I'm the same person, I'm just wearing different hats. I have a project hat and an operational hat. But in many cases, in most cases, the project team are actually different people than those who assume operational ownership after that. And therefore, we've got to actually allow for being able to recognize where that delivery is created and who owns that. And the operational impacts of projects is also going to vary because the project may include some piloting activities, it may include deployment, as well as transition and implementation activities. But the key point is functional responsibilities that ultimately sustain that change and that actually make operational use of whatever it is the project has produced. And so we've got to understand how to be able to assess value, understand what benefits are promised, both tangible and intangible. And we have to develop a measurement strategy for benefits. And this is where I think there's key advice to be able to work through as project managers about how we actually support value. My clarification about defining project success versus business success wasn't to be able to abdicate responsibility for business success, but it was to be clear about who owns it, where it's defined, and when it's delivered, and therefore what we do need to be aware of and how we can be aware of it as we're actually managing the project. Because when we develop a measurement strategy for benefits, what I found is that there's actually two different strategies that we want to employ. There's two different measurement approaches that we want to use because there are two different types of benefits that we want to be able to track and monitor. The first one is interim benefits. And what I mean by interim benefits is the benefits that are able to be realized during the project, either as a result of changes that are implemented inside of the project, or more appropriately, as leading indicators of the potential for the operational change to actually be successful. When we think about a project, for example, think about a process improvement project. Oftentimes, as you work through those, there are a number of phases in making process improvements, especially where those processes are actually institutionalized within information systems. We start with whatever the current state is, understand the process as it exists today, and also understand the performance of that process today. We then model what the process should be and what it will ideally look like once the overall process improvement is changed. And what we're able to do then is look at, well, what's the delta? What's the difference in terms of expected performance and expected quality, consistency, defect rates, failure rates that we're going to see with the new process relative to the old process. What we have at that point is a model of what the new process should look like and a model of what the performance of the new process should look like that we can then be able to project expected performance and expected impact of. And in many cases, that's the basis of, at a higher level, how we've actually developed our business case in the first place, is to be able to make some overall assumptions about what that's going to look like. But we're now actually diving into the detail of the work, which means we're able to make much more granular assumptions about expected performance that give us some leading indicators about what the potential for ultimate impact should be once we actually implement the result. They're not a guarantee, but they're a leading indicator of what could be. They're that interim idea of what's possible. And we also want to be able to understand the acceptance by stakeholders. That's, again, a good leading indicator. Is there a level of satisfaction, buy-in, acceptance, engagement as a result of the delivery of those projects? As well, we need to look at the final benefits, what the impacts are that are promised within the business case, and the degree to which those are actually being realized. So we need to measure during the project, but we also need to put in place the ability to be able to assess that after the project is actually done. We also have to clarify the responsibility for change, to be able to define who is responsible for change. And it's not just one person, it's not just even one function, but it's to be able to understand where that overall responsibility lies and what that actually looks like. We need to be able to understand who's accountable for delivery of the benefits and how accountability is actually going to be established and how that's going to be assessed. And that needs to be done across both the project organization as well as functional management. Because our project management and our project team is typically going to be responsible for some aspect of that change management. We're going to have training activities. We're going to have piloting activities. We're going to be actually involved in the deployment and implementation of some subset of the project results. And so there is accountability for the change that does accrue to the project that we want to understand and we want to be able to evaluate. And that often involves as well stakeholder preparation, being able to train them, bring them up to speed, familiarize them with what they're going to be accountable for doing, what that's going to look like, and be able to make sure there's a level of acceptance, buy-in, and commitment to be able to use that. And that may also include some form of interim implementation, some sort of pilot activities. In addition, we need to understand the responsibility for change from a functional management perspective. Who is responsible for supporting the ongoing change? Who is responsible for making sure the results of the project actually do get used? And for monitoring, assessing, and managing the performance in using those overall results. So our ideal should be business case provides an identification of here's the potential of how the process can perform. How are we making sure we're following through in terms of realizing that potential? And where we're not fully realizing that potential, being able to analyze and understand where are we falling down, where are the problems being encountered, where are the difficulties being incurred, and what do we need to be able to do about that? And to continue to actually manage that change, to be able to enable realization of the promised benefits, which may involve additional activities not conceived of as part of the project when it was originally defined, but that are necessary to occur to be able to make the project results work. And from there, what we've got to be able to do is actively measure the impact of the projects, both in terms of the potential or interim results, and the degree to which the results of the project should enable delivery of value, which emphasizes some degree of anticipation. It includes our interim measures, it includes our stakeholder acceptance, it includes our pilot activities, as I talked about. But also that understands the actual impacts, the results of the implementation, and the work that's being done in terms of the functional and operational adoption of the results, actually using the results of the project and working through the change that was anticipated, as well as any additional required evolution of the practices, of the structure, of the approach necessary to be able to make that value work. And it's important to recognize that it's not only going to be the work that's conceived. I was involved in a different project audit a number of years ago now, probably about 7 or 8, where it was actually one of the first value realization audits that I was ever involved in. And specifically the audit engagement, the project itself had already been audited. It was a project that had been a fairly large struggle for the organization. There were a lot of implementation challenges, a lot of project management challenges, a lot of change management challenges. And they'd gone through a project audit and lessons learned to be able to evaluate how do we improve managing projects like this in the future so that the pains and the experiences that we had the first time around don't occur again. But the audit they were now following up on about 3 years later was a value realization audit, which was going back to the business case and looking at, well, what was committed in terms of the performance results when the project was approved, and to what extent have we actually received those benefits? Have we realized the change, and have we realized the performance improvements, the value, the benefits that were promised in the business case at the front? And as one can well imagine, I started the project with then looking for the business case, only to discover there hadn't been one. And so what I had to do was to, in essence, forensically build, if you had done a formal business case when you actually started the project, what would you have actually said? I needed to go back through presentations that were made to the board of directors, to various member organization executives, to the executive themselves to be able to understand, what did you think the possible performance was going to be? What did you think the cost structure was going to be? And what were the potential benefits? And then I had to look at, to what extent have those benefits been realized? Now, the project had originally been conceived in 3 phases. So there was replacing what they had. There was then providing online access to their members' organizations to it. And then there was automating a lot of manual workflow that they had around it. Because of the pain associated with that project, they only did phase 1. Which was basically replicating functionality that they already had in place. And the interesting thing is, most of the original projected benefits were actually in phase 2 and in phase 3. So they had never done the work and they never implemented the changes that they originally thought was supposed to produce most of the value of delivering that project. Now the interesting thing about that, though, is once they'd actually implemented the results, I mean, the system that they implemented didn't work very well. There were a number of challenges in terms of using it. There were a number of processing challenges. There were a number of difficulties in terms of quality assurance, in terms of follow-up. And so there became, as a result, a need for a lot more work around continuing to enhance process, around restructuring roles and job functions. There's a lot more operational work necessary to then be able to adapt to the system that did get implemented. The interesting thing that came out of that is once you actually looked at the performance impacts of all of the changes that they had made, planned in the project and implemented afterwards, they actually delivered more benefits to the organization than they had originally promised and expected if they had done all 3 phases that were originally conceived of the project. And that was actually not a well-received message within the organization because the project itself had been so painful. They were very concerned, understandably, that really it hadn't produced a lot of benefit. It actually had, but it wasn't attributable to the project. Where the benefit was attributable to was all of the other operational changes that also occurred after the project was done. All the additional processing steps, all the additional process improvements, all of the restructuring and role redefinition that allowed them to be able to still function with a less than perfect system. But the point there is they still got the benefits of that investment. It's just that it took a lot more time and a lot more effort, and some of that effort wasn't actually inside of the project. What that leads to, in terms of conclusions, realizing value is a critical aspect of projects. It's an incredibly important thing to be able to do, to understand what change is being promised by the business case, and also to be able to assess to what extent are we delivering and actually attaining the results of that business case. But accountability for that is varied. Certainly, the project manager is responsible for the project results, and they are directly and fully accountable with the team for project success. And without question, functional and operational management is responsible for the ongoing change after the project is done. But there are some aspects of change and implementation that are shared and divided, and we need to be clear about what those are and how they are being shared and divided and how they distribute across both the project and the functional responsibilities to make sure the larger, fully contemplated change associated with the project actually gets realized. As well, assessment of value requires a commitment to be able to measure and to putting a measurement strategy and approach in place in order to be able to deal with that, to be able to assess the impacts that are promised by the project, and also to be able to then separate out the idea of interim versus final value that's being realized from the project in implementing the project within the organization. That can include, as we've discussed, an assessment of stakeholder acceptance that provides a leading indicator of the degree to which the change is going to be successful, the results of the project are going to be positively received, and therefore the conditions are favorable and allowing for the results of the project to be able to deliver successfully. What we also need to do within that is to clarify accountability for the project and for the functional organization to be able to manage that change process. Most important, we need to be able to recognize the approach to this is going to vary by project. There is no one right way to be able to do this. There is no one right split of responsibility. There is no one right set of measures. There's no one right way to be able to measure interim impact or to be able to ultimately measure final impact. And a lot of that is going to depend upon, first off, the benefits being promised in the business case and the degree to which they're tangible or they're intangible. It's going to depend upon what implementation responsibilities exist within the project and what implementation responsibilities exist functionally outside of the project. It's going to depend on what the defined handoffs are around that, and based on the types of benefits that have been identified, what measurement strategies can actually be put in place. So it's influenced by the degree to which that change is actually going to be managed inside of or outside of the project, who owns it, what the benefit is, and how that benefit can actually be managed. That is the end of the formal part of our presentation today. It gets us to our Q&A session. We've got a number of questions to work through already, but just a reminder in terms of the overall process, we have a Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. You can use that to pose questions as we work through the Q&A process, and I will work through as many of the ones that we have as I can in the roughly 11 minutes that we have available. So first off, shouldn't the project value be defined in the business case? Interesting question. And in part it might be, but the reality is at that point it's going to be difficult to be able to do because we haven't actually defined the project. Business case precedes project definition. We don't have a project charter yet, typically. We don't have a project plan yet. So project success is going to still be largely contingent on the objective that gets finalized, the scope that gets committed to, and in particularly the estimate and budget associated with that project. And that's why it's so important to separate out project success and business case success and not try to conflate them together, even though it's tempting for many people. Unfortunately, project managers as well as business cases to actually, or business executives to try to be able to do that. And how do you differentiate between benefits realization management and portfolio management? Great question. And in actual fact, the differentiation is business realization management is a subset of portfolio management. The way I think about portfolio management is it really combines three separate discrete areas of focus: identifying the outcomes that are being desired and prioritizing, evaluating, and selecting the projects that are going to be able to deliver on those outcomes and deliver on the corresponding value that I care about to be able to attain those outcomes. Providing a level of governance around the projects in the portfolio while they're underway to be able to make sure that they do what they're supposed to, that they deliver successfully, and they're likely to deliver on the things that I care about in terms of outcomes. And that's why those interim value measures are so critical. And then to actually realize the benefits once the projects are actually done. But it's not solely a product of portfolio management. And this is the distinction I think is really important to make. PMI tends to shove business realization management into portfolio management also exclusively. You do not have to have a portfolio management capability in place in order to be able to do benefits realization management. You need a business case, and you need a commitment to actually be able to measure and manage the results of that business case, but you don't need a portfolio, and you don't need to be doing portfolio management. Business realization management, the realization of value, can be done in projects, it can be done in programs, and it can be done in portfolios. My belief is you're going to see the standards evolve in the coming years to better reflect that and to dissociate, or at least not solely have, benefits realization management stuck in portfolio management, but to have it exist in all of them. Next question, doesn't that imply, though, that if a project is chartered to deliver an increase in business value, business success isn't in the control of the project team, the project is under-scoped? Going back to the first question that I asked, we're again kind of conflating that idea of project success and business case success. The project should be chartered to deliver the result that we cared about choosing to do the project. That result is dependent upon the business case and the benefits that are promised within that business case, which is going to conceive what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, but then is going to get elaborated in the actual project management process. We need to be clear about keeping our business case separate from our project charter and project plan, because they're two separate things that we as project managers need to manage, but they are separate things. So do I believe it's project manager's responsibility and scope as part of project closeout to evaluate and provide feedback on the business case success of the project? Awesome question. My answer to that is going to have to be a qualified it depends, but I'm going to tell you what it depends on. It's a couple of different things. First off, it's going to depend on, was there actual interim value measures that were defined and interim value objectives that were defined as part of the project? Because at project completion, I should be able to assess those. So to that extent, yes. As part of project closeout, we should be able to evaluate what value impact did we have on the project that we were supposed to have. Separately from that, though, the business case is going to define, here is the expected payback period. Here is the period that we need to allow for benefits realization to occur. And so there needs to be coming back to that business case after implementation of that through what's often called, appropriately, a post-implementation review, not project closeout. Post-implementation review is actually referring to review of the business case and the attainment of the benefits that were promised. And that might be 6 months or a year, or even 3 or 4 years out, depending upon what the particular scope of that project was. Okay, so the next question. Don't you think what we refer to as project success in this presentation is just project management success? And don't you think product success is more important to the executive who's paying the piper? Thoughts? My first thought, to be honest, is we're starting to play semantic games, and I want to be careful about that. What I'm calling project success is actually twofold. There is a dimension of product success. Did I get the thing that I was supposed to do? And also project management success. Did I manage well the delivery of that thing? But what I'm specifically looking at is scope of project. What did we start with as an expectation? Did we deliver that? And the separate construct I'm trying to create is an understanding of scope of business case. What do we promise as value? Assessment of business case, what did we actually deliver as value? And we need to keep those ideas separate and distinct. You may call them different things, but my view, project success has both a product dimension, that I get what I wanted, and a project management dimension, that I do that on time and on budget and well. And business success, did I actually then deliver on the promises contained within the business case? And should these parameters be defined during planning? Oh, absolutely, you betcha. But we need to be clear about planning. Value needs to be planned in the business case, and project results need to be planned in the charter, and then expanded upon within the project plan. All right, awesome question coming up. Is there any difference in how project value is utilized in an Agile project? Yes and no. And this is the interesting thing about Agile projects. Agile projects reframe how we think about project management. They don't lead with scope. They lead with schedule and budget. And then they build sprints in, and they build into those sprints the scope that can be reasonably accomplished depending on the stories that get identified and get committed to within each of those sprints. But when we're doing the project, when we're selling the project, what we're doing is we're selling a cost and a time frame to produce something awesome. Because really, I mean, that sounds simplistic and slightly flip, and perhaps it is, but it's the truth. What we're saying is, I will build you something of value if you commit to provide me this team for this length of time, and it's going to cost this much for them to be able to do that. And the promise that we're making is that that is going to deliver some value. Now, specifically what, we may not be fully able to conceive what the finished result is going to be. It's why we're taking an Agile approach. But we should still be able to define the potential of what is solvable and doable within that project from a business process perspective, to be able to say what benefits do we think are reasonable. Even if we can't specifically line up cause and effect, make all of these changes, produce something that looks exactly like this, produce these benefits, there should still be, within a range of qualifications, assumptions, an expected return that we're expecting to see in order to be able to make investment in doing an Agile project worthwhile. Now that does change, and I think it does put even more of an emphasis then on developing appropriate interim measures as well as final measures of value. Because another principle of Agile is that we're actually, in each sprint, producing something that is usable. And so the potential is we are actually not even just piloting, but actually starting to deploy and implement functional capability even while the project is going on. And so we're actually placing a greater level of emphasis on being able to understand that, being able to monitor that, but also being able to then use that interim assessment of value to be able to feed into subsequent sprints. So what do we need to keep doing more of? And what is the continued impact of being able to do that actually look like? So someone has to ask, what about value measurement in Agile? They did. They beat you to it. I hopefully have answered it. Actually, that seems to be a popular question all of a sudden. Additional question, final one we'll do today. Ultimately, wouldn't you agree the success of a project is the value it delivers to the customer? Absolutely, I do. I 100% do, and I hope that I've been very clear about that as we worked through. But it's value from a number of different perspectives. It is a question of we need to be able to deliver a result that we actually care about. And so we can't discount what project success looks like. We can't discount the value of getting a good product or doing that on time and budget, because that's part of what makes that valuable. That's the cost structure. And if we don't do it on time, and if we don't do it on budget, then we're actually preventing the organization from being able to deliver on value. So that's still important, and we shouldn't discount and rob that in order to be able to reorient the focus on, yeah, but what does the actual customer care about? We need to do that also. And so we need to articulate what that value looks like and what it actually means. All right, that's the time we've got for questions. This has been a Project Headway presentation. What is Project Headway? It is projectmanagement.com's process for project management. It's designed to provide organizations, project managers, and project teams with concrete guidance and processes to be able to manage projects, programs, and actually portfolios within a defined project framework. It is simple, it is straightforward, it is also scalable, and it is available for free to all premium and paid Project Management Institute members. If you collect PDUs, your PDU registration will be automatically submitted. It will be recorded to your projectmanagement.com account within 24 hours, and then it will be batch submitted to PMI by no later than the following Monday. To be eligible for one PDU, you must have been present and in attendance for at least 90% of the webinar. If after 2 weeks you don't see the PDU on PMI's PDU credit reporting site, please contact Heather at projectmanagement.com. She'll be more than happy to help you out. As well, we'll be pushing out a survey and you'll be receiving a link. We'd appreciate you taking the time to be able to provide your feedback. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you're valuing. Let us know what you'd like to see in future webinars. And we really appreciate the time you take to be able to do that. Lastly, mark your calendars for next month when we talk about a practical guide to risk management. That's coming up Thursday, the 19th of November. As always, that'll be at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's the end of our session. If you've got any questions for me, you can reach out to me on email at mark.mullally@interthink.ca. I also hang out on Twitter at @markmullally. If you'd like more information about Project Headway, please get in touch with Gina Jones, and she can be reached at gina@projectmanagement.com. Thanks very much. I appreciate your time, your attendance, your attention, all of the fabulous questions. Good luck delivering value with your projects. We'll see you next month.